Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Friday Reads video for September 20th, 2019. To start with, I finished this technically on audiobook. This is The Sisters of the Winter Wood by Rena Rossner. This is part of my Jewish fairy tale retellings project that I'm doing this month. And in about a week, or hopefully I will be, or less, I will be doing a review of this and two other books that I'll be mentioning in this video, actually. This one is based off of The Goblin's Market by Christina Verzetti, but it takes place in a shtetl town around 1903 in the Russian Empire. It also dips into myth-making about humans who turn into animals for various reasons. We have a group of Hasidim, of ultra-Orthodox Jews, who turn into bears, and then a group of non-Jews who turn into swans. They're sort of the good guys in this, although they start out sort of acrimonious, but the real bad guys are the goblins who, are, much like in fairy lore, are luring people to their deaths with what look like pretty trinkets, more or less. I really liked it, although I do think the ending got a little preachy. I feel like maybe I think the strongest parts of this story were the retelling of the Goblin Market specifically, and then it got a little bit bloated when it moved beyond that. I mean, I know it had to a little bit for this bears and swans stuff, and then that gets into commentary on the anti-Semitism of the time in part. But I still think a couple of the relationships that one of the sisters had got a little bit bloated, and it sort of got a little melodramatic, even more so than the original story of a sister being led to her doom is. So I just kind of wish she'd tightened this a little bit, but I enjoyed it all the same. Next, I finished Atlas Alone by Emma Newman, and I think this is so far my favorite read of the month. So we are back on track, as it were, in terms of the Planetfall series. I mean, I don't think it's my favorite. It's probably my third favorite of the four, even. I mean, I guess I really enjoy the whole series. Before Mars is the most hiccupy to me, but anyway, this one kind of gets us back on track. It's supposed to be a standalone, but it really is pretty directly a sequel to Book 2, After Atlas. And you don't want to go into this if you don't want to be spoiled about the massive climactic ending of After Atlas. It takes place on a generation ship, and to avoid spoilers, I guess I'll say that Dee, our main character, is looking for revenge for something pretty heinous that happened at the end of After Atlas. And she's invited by a mysterious entity to play in immersive video games, which is sort of her life in this book, like her major pastime. And she's playing this violent video game that is uncannily reminiscent of her life in terms of what it depicts. In terms of technology, it's like way above anything she ever saw about what they were able to glean about someone's life, even though, even in this future where people are like, plugged into the max, and I think privacy as we know it is very much a thing of the past. But anyway, when she kills this person who's responsible in part for this horrible thing in the game, he ends up dead in real life. And things kind of devolve from there. Dee's friend is actually on the case to try to figure out what happened to this guy, but Dee is getting in deeper and deeper with this mysterious force about who was responsible for this tragedy and what she feels compelled to do about it. It has a pretty shocking, sort of sad little ending, as it were. Newman's a pretty cynical writer, I think, in terms of what she puts her characters through and what she sees as the future of humanity, I guess. I really liked it. I mean, unlike Anna and Before Mars, I think Dee wasn't, the outsized Mary Sue-esque hero of the story in a way. It turns out she existed in a world that was beyond her. I mean, sometimes Newman gets into this analytical style of writing that feels like she's explaining the world building that she's doing, and it gets a little eyebrow archy in a way. Like you can see the strings behind, the puppet show. But ultimately, Dee isn't, in complete control of everything, and there's some deeper themes, including one of my own personal favorites in the way that Newman probes the idea of revenge and how it isn't just, a happily ever after. But now I'm left with the whole idea of, wait, this can't be the end, can it? Because I don't think there's any news that I know of so far about a fifth Planetfall series book, but there has to be one. We can't end here, right? I mean, I know we're probably going to go to a completely new character, and Dee won't be the center of the story anymore, or maybe even Atlas 2 won't be the center of the story anymore, but there's sort of a broader narrative going on here where it seems like we're trying to circle back to Planetfall, which takes place on this alien planet that everyone else seems to be heading to now. So we gotta go back, right? Right? If I hear any news to that effect, of course you'll be hearing about it in my latest anticipated reads video, whenever that goes up. Next, I squeezed this little number in here. This is The Falconer by Dana Czapnik. And I think I might have finally found it. A 2019 literary release that I might be able to nominate for the Goodreads Choice Awards this year. I think it's a pretty strong possibility. It's certainly my favorite of the 2019 literary fiction releases that I've read so far, although I'm almost fighting myself on it because I really dislike these characters. Anyway, this is a story that takes place, it's a coming of age in 1993 New York City, when 17-year-old Lucy Adler is about to graduate from high school, and she's dealing with a bunch of what comes next, what does adulthood mean sort of stuff, like what do I do for college, I'm this awesome ball player, but I'm a girl, and that's, not seen as all that important, and I have this crush on this friend I've had for years who's charismatic but also a bit of a jackass. What to do with that? And then I have a cousin who is living in Brooklyn in a bohemian artsy lifestyle. That seems like living the dream. What if I go over there? I mean, it's one of those stories where it's very character internal drama stuff, not a lot happens on a external scale, but it's about Lucy navigating her relationships and navigating New York City, which is, well, this is like an elegy to that era of New York City, right on the cusp, I guess, of the first strains of gentrification. Rudy Giuliani's coming in to clean up the streets, and the Bohemians are getting upset about a possible Kmart in the neighborhood, that sort of thing. I'm a rather sentimental, emotional person, which is very much not what Lucy and the rest of the characters are, especially the rest of the characters. But even Lucy, when bad things happen to her, she doesn't, center on them quite as much as I would. But I do think that probably lends to the fact that this narrative transcends the genre, as it were. It certainly, I don't think, would be seen as YA. There's a lot of sort of crossover appeal literature, which I think might be classed as adult fiction. I'll get to one of those examples later, but it has a lot of YA appeal and a lot of sort of YA tropes. But I have a feeling that Generation Z might not get into this one as much because of all of that Generation X lack of sentimentality. Like, it's just not that relatable to today's young folk. I mean, that's not probably entirely true. I think there are some universal themes, but I think that this isn't getting lumped as much into YA, despite the fact that it's a coming-of-age story about a 17-year-old, because it's very much of its time, which is not the right use of that phrase, I think, because it was, written this year, but it's depicting so much this time period of New York and this sort of Generation X American Psycho-esque lack of sentimentality, this boredom and banality of growing up in that era when things seem to be going okay, so what do we do? No wars or that sort of thing, or at least in terms of what this subset of people in America have to deal with anyway. But I was engrossed. I mean, even though I really didn't like the characters, and I got annoyed at Lucy a lot, especially for her takes on other women, of course. As a tomboy, she's a little too dismissive of other women, but then she did get challenged a bit in that sometimes, and there were some women that the author threw in that were a little more complicated. I think I have my own biases in a way about falling for charismatic jackasses, so that story really kind of drew me in a bit, and I was really invested in the characters when I was reading it, so that feels like a bit of a success to me. I'm not sure if this reads like a 40-something in the late 2010s, writing nostalgically about her growing up experience in a vanishing New York in 1993, or if it reads like someone in 1993 on the cusp of adulthood realizing that her world is about to change. In a way, I think she can have her cake and eat it too as an author in that respect. But I think I liked it, and I read this for my book club, which is meeting on Monday, so I don't know, they might take me back down to earth, especially since these characters are so similar to other ones that we've read about who are unsentimental and promiscuous in a way. Not so much Lucy, but her boy, Percy, is kind of promiscuous. So I'll be curious to see what the rest of my group, which is mostly made up of fellow millennials, thinks of this very patently Gen X coming-of-age story. Next, I'm in the middle of listening to this, also on audiobook, though I do have this print copy of Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. Future Rachel here, but this here is the book that I meant in terms of something that's being marketed as adult fiction, but it has a lot of YA appeal. It is about young women asserting themselves, after all, and the young adult community seems to like it. This is the second of my Jewish fairy tale retellings that most concretely falls into that genre, because this is a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin. Though Novik also expands the story, though I think in her case it works, that the framework that she put in allows for some more complexity of characters and plot arcs and that sort of thing. But anyway, in this tale, also taking place in sort of a shtetl of I'd say the Russian Empire, but I have a feeling her fantasy world is based on Lithuania, because that's where her father is from, and like her first standalone fantasy novel, Uprooted, that took place in fantasy Poland, because that's where her mother was from. So Miriam is our Jewish character. She's the daughter of a moneylender, and her father's a horrible moneylender, and her family is destitute until she takes up the reins. And once she's able to get the business back on track, she's able to hire someone, and the person she hires is another young girl named Wanda, but a Christian peasant girl. And then we have a third major character, Rena, who is actually the daughter of a duke, so she's much more high class than either of these other girls. I mean, Miriam's technically merchant class, but she is an outsider. She is a Jew, and you know, as things get worse and worse in this story, especially because of a magical element, Novik is slowly heaping on people blaming the Jews more and more for that sort of thing, because Miriam's metaphorical ability to change silver into gold attracts the attention of a supernatural king, a Steric king, and he's also sort of fairy-esque, basically. And he is the king of this winter kingdom, and he wants her to change silver into gold, and so he sets her these crazy tasks, which she completes by taking his silver to a jeweler to make into jewelry, and then, you know, getting gold for them in response. But when she gets to this magical kingdom, that gift actually turns into, you know, a physical thing of her touching silver, and it turns to gold. So yeah, that's where I am right now. We have these women in marriages that they don't like, sort of prisoners to these marriages that are bad for them, trying to scrape their way out together, basically, making a plan to get their freedom. And I love it. I'm finding it incredibly compelling. Once again, I'm drawn into the characters, and in this case, of course, there is a lot more external plot going on, and I'm drawn into that as well. We're getting more characters as narrators, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. I guess in a way I'm just aware of the fact that they're less fleshed out as characters, and it's more about advancing the plot. But I do think that Miriam and Wanda and Rena, especially Miriam, I think, are pretty well drawn in terms of their resilience and their anger about, you know, the injustices put upon them. So yeah, the next book I'm in the middle of, although that's really too generous to say, is Antisemitism Here and Now by Deborah Lipstadt. This is her nonfiction accounting of what anti-Semitism looks like in its complexity, and particularly how it's manifesting in the modern day in the West. Lipstadt uses this conceit. She is a history professor, and she uses this conceit of creating a student and a colleague who write her letters, and they kind of are part of this chain together. I'm seeing it as an email chain because that makes it easier. They're part of this writing letters chain of discussing anti-Semitism, where the colleague and the student pose her questions, and she writes detailed answers with a lot of citations about what anti-Semitism looks like. Sometimes we go into specific examples about world leaders on various political spectrums that traffic in anti-Semitism. So the setup makes it somewhat convenient because she can sort of go through things thematically one at a time as she wants to, because they're not based on a real correspondence that she had. It's just based off of composites of things that she's been researching and discussing with people. And I'm finding it, you know, not so much enlightening at all. I'm not necessarily learning anything new except about perhaps specific events and specific people, but in terms of what anti-Semitism is, I'm not learning anything new. But it's nice to sort of wash away any emotional components, a bunch of defensiveness and obscuring of the facts, because she deals in the facts, and so it's like things kind of feel clearer when she's talking about them, and it's harder to hide from the idea of anti-Semitism or to you know, justify it or cover it up, basically, when she's just laying out the facts for you. So yeah, it felt like apropos timing. I mean, I wanted to read this year because it was published this year, and I wanted to read nonfiction published this year, possibly to vote for in the Goodreads Choice Awards, but this month in particular I'm reading a lot about anti-Semitism, or in, you know, fairy tale-esque books, or I also read an anti-Semitic book at the beginning of the month, so it's nice to clear away the detritus and talk about the issues in this one. And finally, here's the last of my Jewish fairy tale retellings that I'm hoping to start soon. This is The Red Magician by Lisa Goldstein. I think it was written actually the year I was born. And it is about, you know, magicians within the context of the Holocaust and a specific town that's coming quickly under the jurisdiction of the Nazis. And, you know, it's a town with Jews in it, of course. I first heard about this, like I hear about a lot of SFF, from Elizabeth at Books and Pieces channel, so I'll try to link to the video where she mentioned this down below. From the flap it says, "The Red Magician is the tale of Kissy, a young girl in a backwoods Eastern European village in the early 1940s, a hamlet so isolated that the villagers know nothing of the brewing war, have no hint of the future, save for ominous dreams. Into this village comes Voros, a red-headed wanderer, a juggler and magician, to disrupt their lives and antagonize the local rabbi, with whom he must fight a Kabbalistic duel to which Kishi is a secret witness. Then the Nazis arrive and the world changes. Kitsi is first imprisoned, then must journey with Voros back to what remains of her village for a climactic battle between the old world and the new." I guess we won't be seeing any fairies or fairy-esque creatures perhaps in this one, although who knows, but I'm looking forward to getting to it, and again I will be discussing this and the other two books I held up hopefully before the end of the month. So that about covers it for me now. Should be a fun weekend for me. Sometime on Saturday, I think I will be heading to Baltimore, where I will be having a sleepover with my 5-year-old niece and my parents. At least that's the plan right now. And then early on Sunday, we will all be heading together to the Maryland Renaissance Festival. That's one of my personal staples. I absolutely love going every year. And I am hoping my niece will enjoy it too. She went once a couple of years ago when she was significantly younger, but seems like it's something that could be a lot of fun for her too. And looking forward to seeing her again. I haven't seen her in a while, so should be a great time for me all around. That's my hope. Such a wonderful time to be sitting down with reading Antisemitism Here and Now on the down low. So I hope you have fun weekend plans as well, or at least some good reading to get to. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.